They arrived on a Thursday with thermoses and polite smiles. They said they missed me, and they said they were worried about my health. They also said, nearly in the same breath, that it would be easier if I updated my will. My name is Harold. I am 68 years old. I built this house with my hands, tile by tile, nail by nail, sweat that seeped into splinters and stayed. I fixed neighbors' boilers for 20 years, and I kept my own accounts neat because that was the part of life I could control. They left when they were young and hungry for cities, and I did not begrudge them. Only the silence that grew polite with distance. Years later, when their cars appeared in my drive, something in the air felt like a transaction disguised as a visit. Estate planning, they said, cheerful and careful, as if they were handing me a cup of tea. One of them produced a business card for a man in a suit. He's a friend who can expedite this, they said. Expedite, I learned, is a small word with a big appetite. It eats time, it flavors haste, and haste favors those who plan to be dishonest. I said I would speak to my own lawyer. Not because I wanted to be difficult, but because I knew paper is a kind of armor, and because I remembered nights in freezing flats thinking paperwork was the only reliable thing I had. Elaine was the name I chose, a plain-speaking lawyer who did not stroke egos and who liked to keep copies of everything. She told me things straight, and that honesty felt like armor I could wear. We made a will that said what I wanted, a modest annuity for care, a clause that the house be offered first to a community trust if the family could not maintain it, and specific bequests that reflected decades of work, not sudden charity. I signed, we notarized, and Elaine placed the original in a bank deposit box under dual control. I walked out of her office with a calm I had not expected. They did not like the calm. Pressure arrived like weather that changes, slow and inevitable. At first, it was a suggestion. Simplify this, Dad, they said, so taxes won't be a mess for the family. Then visits lengthened. Polite questions about memory crept in like small rodents. Do you remember when? They would ask. And in the question was an implication that my recollection might fail. They brought friends with titles, men who said probate, as if it were a tutorial and not a tether. They brought a man in a suit who smelled faintly of aftershave and paperwork. They offered codicils like wrapped presents. Each one was an invitation to write over what I had already written. I refused each time, plainly, because winding someone out of what they have earned is not a kindness. At night, the refusal sat in my chest like a stone, but the quieter stone of evidence is heavier and tougher than a scream. Then came the call that changed everything. Elaine's voice on the line was clipped, professional, a blade disguised as a tone. Harold, she said, we received a notarized request for a copy of your will. The signature is suspicious. Do not sign anything. That sentence snapped the world into a narrower frame. Someone had taken the first step. They had tried to make the law look like consent. Forgery is unromantic. It is not cinematic. It is workmanlike, a slow imitation of handwriting, an attempt to manufacture authority. But it leaves a trace, pressure, stroke direction, hesitation where a real hand flows. Experts can read those things. We locked down the original. Elaine moved the deed paperwork. She set dual controls on the deposit box, and we notified the notary. She recommended a document examiner. I learned then that the practical defense against theft is process, and process is just a set of small, stubborn acts performed precisely. They changed their tactics. The man in a suit started bringing nodding friends with quiet credentials. We just want to help, they said, pouring tea and complimenting my porridge. They asked about my health in ways that sounded like a doctor's checklist, each question an attempt to plant a seed that would justify hasty signatures later. I began to keep a ledger of visits, time-stamped emails, and the small oddities that made a pattern when stacked together. Not secret recordings, nothing illegal, only what they offered freely. Paper is patient. Paper remembers things people later wish to forget. I remember the exact words the man said the morning he handed me the codicil and smiled as if offering a neighborly favor. Sign now, while your hand is steady, Mr. Walker. It will only take a minute. It was the most ordinary line someone could use to ask you to give away a life. I took the codicil to Elaine. She read it slowly, and her face tightened the way a door closes. This reassigns the trust clause, she said. It directs the property to beneficiaries who did not show care for it when its upkeep mattered. This is not care. It is a transfer disguised as convenience. The man in a suit had not been subtle after all. He had been meticulous. We called the document examiner. He came with tools of quiet scrutiny, magnifiers and samples of pen strokes, and an hour's patience. Forgeries leave a signature's echo. The way pressure begins, the micropauses where hesitation sits, the counterintuitive tilt-a-tracer leaves. He reported back in a clean-typed note. Question signature not consistent with exemplars. Evidence of tracing and atypical pen pressure. That sentence changed the room. It assigned intent to what had been sugar-coated as care. The pretender looked smaller under the microscope of fact. Elaine recommended a formal, public reading of the will, with witnesses present. Make it visible, she said, so it cannot be rearranged in a clerk's back room. A public reading is not spectacle for the sake of spectacle. It is a legal plank dropped across murky waters. When a community witnesses a declaration, the declaration becomes harder to undo. I did not plan to humiliate anyone. I planned to make a record that could not be ignored. The morning of the reading, I sat at the table and noticed how the light angled across the grain of the wood. The house felt older than usual, the edges softer, and the air carried a kind of pointed calm. I understood then that the house had always listened to me. Now it would listen to the law. Neighbors came. A retired postman who could read a signature like a line in a ledger, the minister who keeps silence with practiced hands, the woman who taught my daughter to sew. They came not as audiences, but as witnesses. My children arrived, neat and taut, like paintings that had been varnished. I read the will aloud. I spoke slowly, each clause separate and deliberate, so there would be no room for mishearing. I read the small letter I had written that morning. No fire, only plain facts, what I had built, what I expected, and that I would not be bartered into debt by a forced signature. Their faces shifted, as if the words were arrows aimed at trivial comforts they thought belonged to them. They protested. This is cruel, they said, and in their voices were old accusations mixed with new convenience. They invoked love and duty and the idea that blood is entitlement. But paper is stubborn. It holds things in ink that memory sometimes tries to rework. Halfway through the reading, the retired postman leaned down and said quietly, "That signature is not the same as the one on the tax bill." He had the habit of noticing strokes, and once he hears something odd, he cannot let it go. We brought out the suspicious documents. The postman examined them like an old tradesman examining timber. He frowned. The notary called for the document examiner's report. When the examiner said, in his calm tone, "This signature shows evidence of tracing," the room shifted. The man in the suit, who had been smiling like a helpful neighbor, went a color paler. We called the police, not to make theater, but because forgery is a crime and the law is a tool I respect. Officers took notes, asked questions, and made notations. It felt slow, the way proper things are slow, but the law had a way of making thin excuses collapse under weight. There were costs. Some neighbors whispered that I should have handled it privately. Some of the people I thought were friends paused at my gate like they were balancing the rumor and the fact. But others, quiet, solid people, brought soup and kept me company on the porch in the evenings. Human reactions are not uniform. They are a net of complicity and kindness. A week after the reading, one of my children sent a message that began with "Dad" and ended in a string of pleas. But between those pleas, there was the odd photo of a form, a grayscale image with a signature that did not look like my own. It arrived like a confession in pixels. Legal work is not glamorous. It is methodic. The police logged the complaint, subpoenas went to the bank, and the man in the suit found his credentials scrutinized by people who cared about facts. In courtrooms, intent is pieced together like tile in deposit boxes. The provenance of documents holds like a mortar that binds the truth. The accused faced inquiries. The bank froze questionable transfers. The notary underwent scraping review. The community that had once been passive began to watch carefully. The man who had fancied himself capable of weaving a new history out of old signatures discovered that history resists being remade by a single hand. I remember standing at the window one afternoon and seeing the man in the suit help his friend into a car. Both looked smaller than the first time I had seen them. There was no joy in that. There was only a tight and necessary satisfaction that the truth was not endlessly bendable. We did not need to shred people. We needed to expose the scheme and place protections. That meant filing complaints, cooperating with auditors, and asking the bank to place dual controls on any access to my files. We asked the notary to file a formal notice in the county registry about the attempted access. We created layers that would require collusion to break. The cost for me was not mainly legal. It was social and private. My children moved out within weeks. Calls dwindled. There is a silence that follows exposure, heavy as a winter sky. People who once occupied chairs at my table no longer sat there. The empty seat is a daily measure of what the truth asks you to pay. The neighbor, who had watched the reading and had a habit for noticing signatures, stopped by with a small jar of pickled plums and said, "I always liked your kitchen. It would be a shame if it ended up in the hands of someone who would never use it." Those small acts of solidarity remind you that the community is more than gossip. Months passed, and the legal machine worked with the slowness of fine pottery turning on a wheel. The man in the suit faced charges where evidence supported them. There was a discovery period, depositions, and document exchanges. It is not a quick spectacle. It is a series of small exact actions that build to consequence. The house stayed where it was. The annuity was set aside. The community trust had language to act if the family failed to care for the property. I slept better because I knew that a set of decisions had been documented, and that documentation can be an equalizer when rhetoric presses for advantage. But the resolution was not the same as happiness. Regret arrived, like a weathered guest who visits sometimes to remind you of the cost. The first week, I felt a clean satisfaction, an arithmetic correction to a wrong. Months later, that satisfaction softened into a quiet solitude, a companionable numbness that asks you to consider what you saved and what you lost. One night, I found myself humming an old song my wife used to hum in the kitchen. I realized then that not everything reclaimed comes with applause. Some things come with the slow, steady breathing of a house that will be kept, not taken. People asked me if I would do it again. If the question means would I defend what I earned, unhesitatingly, yes. If it asks whether I would invite this cost of family estrangement, there is no simple answer. We did what we did out of necessity, not vengeance. Preservation can sometimes ask the same price as retribution. There were two small returns I had not expected. The retired postman who noticed the tracing taught me to fix a leaky latch. The minister helped me stitch a loose collar on a winter coat. Neighbors who had once been polite in passing now dropped by with a cup of tea. These are the subtle reparations communities offer when truth is cleared. A month after it all, I opened the deposit box to check the originals. The leather smell of the envelope made me think of years and work. I touched the paper and felt a strange gratitude that the thing I had built would not be given away by hurry. If you were sitting where I sat, facing the smile of someone who returns with the word help, and the honeyed push of urgency, remember this. Ask for time. Ask for witnesses. Make the lawyer independent. Keep originals in more than one place. Buy a safe deposit box with dual signature. Invite neighbors or a trusted third party to be present when decisions are read aloud. The tactics of those who aim to take are rarely sophisticated on moral grounds. They are often banal, dressed in helpfulness, and they prey on the tired. They will pressure you when you are isolated and offer expedience as a kindness. Do not mistake a request to expedite for care. In the quiet of the evening, I sometimes imagine what would have happened if I had signed a codicil in a tired moment. It is a small nightmare. The house in other hands, years of work gifted away like a convenience. That nightmare pushed me to be more careful in my dealings. The law is not a perfect shield, and communities are not always just. There will be whispers that you were unreasonable, that you broke the family. Those are hard to hear. But the greater cost is letting a life be rearranged by those whose presence had once been absent. I do not speak of this like a sermon. I speak of it like a ledger, items noted, evidence preserved, actions taken. It is the kind of story my hands understand. Measure, cut, fit, tighten. The recipe for protection is dull. Copies, notarization, witnesses, public records. Boring things, but they do the work. The last neighbor who visited after the court files closed asked how I was faring. I said, stronger, in a way I did not know I needed. He laughed and squeezed my shoulder. You did the sensible thing, he said. Sensible is a quieter word than heroic, but it keeps houses standing. There is no theatrical revenge here, no triumphant speech. There is a calm that comes from the removal of a lie's usefulness. The house that I hammered and painted stands still, and the garden gets tended by hands that are not busy trying to take it. That steadiness is its own reward. If you ever face the choice, choose clarity. Make it legal, make it witnessed, and let the community see what truth looks like. Protect the work of your hands, not because you distrust your children, but because stewarding a life and protecting a legacy is a duty that outlives any single day. The cost may be silence at the table. The saving, however, is the integrity of what you leave behind. There is a final thought I leave with you. A small jar of pickles on my porch did more to heal neighborly divides than any heated argument could, and a clean signature in an office safe can protect a family from the dull cunning of hurry. Keep your papers close, your witnesses close, and your counsel independent. That is the way I chose, and the house stands. And I know they will understand when the time comes.